So first of all, thank you for joining us. I think this is our 5th webinar, and every time we do them, they get bigger and bigger. For this one, we've had over 400 people that registered. So some of you guys are going to be live with us, and some of you are watching kind of on asynchronistically, I think is the technical term, kind of watching it after the broadcast. So absolutely, if you have an opportunity where you think this content is going to be valuable, by all means share it. We actually tend to get more views after we do the live broadcast than during, so definitely wanting to ensure everybody has access to this. It will be posted, and Jenny from our team is going to be following up to make sure you all have it. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists today. So first of all, myself, Alina Turner, I'm the CEO of HelpSeeker, and my role today is kind of MC and make sure we're all on track. I'm going to lead us off in terms of an overview of integrated coordinated access, and then I have my colleague Jenn, also from HelpSeeker, and she's, we call her the coordinated access queen. So she's not going to disappoint. She's also the queen of sarcasm. So if you detect that, you're not wrong. That's exactly what it is. It's exactly what's happening. So she's also going to give her take on ICA from somebody who's been practicing in this area for a long time. She was at the Calgary Homeless Foundation and was part of that first wave of coordinated access in the homeless sector. But now she's able to link that work into more broader coordinated access efforts in different parts of the country that she's involved in. And then we're going to move to Lethbridge. So Lori from the City of Lethbridge and Dave from CMHA in Lethbridge are going to talk about Lethbridge's approach and their application of ICA model in their context. And Lori's been leading a lot of the work on the social response to COVID. So I think it's going to be a really important to see how they're doing this work as part of a broader community mobilization effort. And then Dave, he's going to be the lead in terms of rolling this out long term. And again, I'm not going to steal their thunder, but it's a really cool approach that they have going on there. Shanda from the City of Grande Prairie is going to talk to you specifically on the role of on the approach in Grande Prairie and this whole concept of navigators as part of their model. So you'll see how all of these pieces kind of fit together and complement each other quite well. And then we'll have Dena from the City of Abbotsford give you an overview of how they're rolling this out as part of a broader systems integration and transformation effort there. So it's not just homelessness, it's food security, transportation, poverty reduction, and then of course housing stabilization. So with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen. For folks that have joined since I started doing the intro, if you want to just throw into the chat box where you're calling in from, then we all have a sense of where in the country you're joining us from. So I see some Thunder Bay, somewhere Edmonton and Saskatoon. Yeah, awesome to see the diversity. Toronto, there we go. Awesome. So I will begin by thanking you all again, and we're going to have an opportunity to do some questions and Q&As as well. Jenny's going to be tracking some of that as well so that we can answer as many as possible, as we obviously have a lot of participants and not as much time. So here's the deck. Just make this a little bit bigger so that you guys can see what's going on here. Okay, so here we go. Like I said, national trends, Lethbridge, GP, and then Abbotsford. Wanted to share a little bit about us, just because you may not be familiar with HelpSeeker ourselves. So we're a B Corp social enterprise. We're founded in Calgary about 2.5 years ago, but since then expanded to about 27 folks that do work in the social innovation and technology development world. It says here that we're in 100 communities, but this is old. It's actually 200. So yeah, the work that we do focuses on leveraging technology, leveraging best practices, research, as well as community engagement and strategy development to resolve some of the complex social issues that we're all managing. So with integrated coordinated access in particular, our focus has been on developing new ways of thinking about how people are accessing services in a more consistent and easy user-centered way. So a lot of coordinated access work that happens tends to focus on, let's say, the homeless system and making that more efficient. So for instance, creating a protocol for how to triage somebody when they present as homeless in a shelter or at an outreach service, etc. What we found with those is that they're absolutely important to do, but the social safety net itself is much, much bigger than any one silo. So the homeless sector itself is one part of it, but there's obviously a lot more going on at the local level, and there's also a lot more that a person needs than just housing. So how do we create a network of services that are connected and integrated as part of an ecosystem that's nimble and agile and able to respond to these challenges? And of course, that's a nice big picture to have, but then how do you drill it down into exact processes of actually achieving this? So when we got into the world of COVID, and all of you were part of that, the changes that we saw in terms of needs at the community level were also very much influenced by the COVID pandemic's impact. So when we thought about integrated coordinated access and how do we connect all of these services together, suddenly we were seeing new things pop up that may have not been as crazy of an issue before, but now they were becoming major issues. We also saw challenges to populations that we didn't necessarily see as being vulnerable before COVID. So we have a whole new host of challenges. So when we think about the kind of categories of well-being, let's say we obviously have your basic needs where housing and shelter fits in, but there's obviously income, food, daycare, transportation, and employment. Those were some of the major pain points that people expressed when COVID hit. And it wasn't, again, just the complex needs population, but some of it was kind of middle class individuals that emerged as needing support in these areas. So how do we make the ecosystem accessible and easy to navigate to get the right information at the right time? Health and wellness, of course, comes into play, and especially around the mental health, managing stress, the connection between this and addictions as well. That's become an increasingly an area of concern for us to build responses around. And then, of course, how do we maintain family and community connections at a social distance, and how do our services respond effectively, and how do we coordinate now that we're having to move virtually? So those are all of the challenges that we saw as we were developing these new models of integrating services. Traditionally, we would look at things like co-location and doing triages in person, and now we're having to think about everything digitally as well. And then the last piece, which is quite critical and maybe should go before basic needs, but in no order of importance here, is safety and security. So domestic violence is the big one that we're particularly concerned about during COVID, especially because we see reports of folks that are not feeling that they're able to access shelter the same way that they might have been beforehand. And then, of course, some of the other more public safety related challenges, and I don't need to tell you about the Black Lives Matter impact and our sense of safety overall in our communities. So the way that we approach integrated coordinated access and think about it is we take this concept of well-being and personal, family, and community well-being as the kind of cornerstone. So the idea being that somebody's needs or family's needs or community's needs involve these different areas of well-being, and they might include those really immediate basic needs, but they also include things like family and community connections, nature and environment, happiness and creativity, spirituality. And that may not be as obvious off the top, but when you think about sustainable exits from homelessness or sustainable recovery from addictions, etc., those pieces become quite integral, which means that our integrated coordinated access model and what we do now during COVID and post-COVID should have a holistic approach as well in terms of our grounding. In community work that we take on as well, we find that the great challenge in terms of coordinated access to be this cross-sectoral work. So how we might get on the same page in terms of housing or access to housing units or access to shelter beds, access to housing first programs would be quite typical. But when you start wanting to combine resources and services from different sectors, health, justice, education, etc., then the rubber really hits the road in terms of complexity and different approaches in those systems that become really, really difficult to move through. But the good part is and what folks are going to be presenting to you on today is that there are ways to do this integrated work effectively and start small, show results, and expand from there. But it's important to have the bigger play in the back of your mind as you develop this work. And then my last slide is before I hand it over to Jenn to talk about her take on this, is this concept of human-centered design and agile development, that this type of work is complex and dynamic, and a lot of the inputs are not necessarily within our control. So when you're talking about influencing how the health system, for instance, does intake and case management, or when you're trying to collaborate with teachers on preventing kind of vulnerabilities or intervening early, those are systems that we don't traditionally, not all of us traditionally work with or don't work with simultaneously. So to work with all of them at the same time presents a whole different level of complexity. So the way that we need to be thinking about this as well is agile and obviously keeping that human-centered approach front and center as well. So the whole concept here and what this is trying to illustrate in the diagram is that you're always testing, refining, going back, and failing forward. We always say making mistakes is absolutely okay as long as we learn and get going again. So all of the presenters today, I think, take this approach to heart, and they'll develop something, they'll throw it out to the community will tear it up most of the time, but we always end up with something better as a result. And that's because the cycles, these are really quick. Like there's couple weeks instead of waiting 2 years for something to be perfect in planning, then roll it out, then realize it actually sucks. Just doing this much quicker and doing these smaller bits quicker, introducing them, refining them has seemed to work much better for this type of an approach, because it's not a traditional method to systems change. So that's my piece. I'm going to pass it over to Jenn, and Jenn, just let me know when you want me to switch the slides as well.
Sure, thanks. So when we talk about COVID and integrated coordinated access, and this slide's called A Love Story, I do believe integrated coordinated access and coordinated access components and methods are made for current event disruption, for crisis situations, if they're done effectively, if those methods and tools and structures are in place. And I think we saw, it's interesting, I no longer work in the community in Calgary. However, when I think about the 2013 Calgary flood and what was in place from a coordinated access perspective then versus what is in place 2020 in terms of coordination and integration in Calgary, I can imagine that there are a lot of pieces of that that went much smoother. And so when we're talking about what makes ICA so well suited for dealing with something like COVID, it's concentrates also on digital access points and ensuring that there's real-time data about the social services that are available, where they are, what are their hours, etc. Okay. And we're talking about, in terms of integrated coordinated access, what makes it the integrated portion of it is leveraging those prevention and diversion supports in your system by having those already kind of plugged in, ready to go. In the case of something such as a pandemic arising, you can easily, through your communication channels and structures that have already been created, utilize those supports. And prioritization, essentially, I would say, at your fingertips for something that can come up, such as a COVID pandemic. If your ICA or your CA process already has all the information and data you need to be nimble when needed for prioritization, then that can happen. And you can then use your structure to create new definitions of what vulnerable and at-risk means, depending on the situation in your community. And then finally, obviously, for COVID, in the context of integrated coordinated access, coordination, navigation, wayfinding, whatever term your community uses, that is becomes so important and prevalent. The next slide, Alina. So what we're seeing, just to touch on quickly before the real experts start on the panel with their work that they're doing, what we're seeing so far, obviously changes to operations. Everybody has experienced this regardless of your job, phone, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, etc. Seeing a lot of coordinated access processes switch to, electronic signatures. You no longer need to complete so much paperwork. We're going to accept temporary verbal consent in some cases. And I think what's interesting to think about that one is there's what is actually necessary versus what is nice to have for your assessment packages and intakes that you have. We're also seeing physical access points change. So bringing services and points of coordination to people. So bringing them to health centers, because that's where a lot of people were going now. There are communities that have opened their coordinated access supports to be available now in hospital in different communities. And again, with prioritization, we've seen some communities switch to more automated matching and referral process as well. Service delivery through coordinated access, integrated coordinated access. What is a warm transfer now? People are doing phone check-ins more often as much as possible. How do I do housing location, video tours, etc. And obviously new housing options, which there's some great webinars that cover kind of the emerging new practices in housing individuals. Next. And so all of this taken together, so what are our implications when we think about integrated and cross-sectoral work? Is that a truly integrated sector that already has these structures and processes in place can kind of activate themselves, versus when we think about integration, there's kind of co-location, or we will cooperate, or kind of on a continuum of integration. When we talk about true integration, you're already a cohesive unit, ecosystem, functioning as one. So then we've also seen, and that will be touched on later, the importance of system navigators, those local experts who it is their job to stay on top of who is open, in what capacity, who are they serving, what has changed there. Those experts already exist in our communities, and I think COVID has realized people need to leverage them more. Consistent real-time communications and information sharing, of course, because everything was changing day by day, week by week. But this also touches on information systems and homeless management information systems, that information sharing that can happen in real time. I think there are communities out there who still operate on paper. There are communities out there who have organizations that don't have websites. This has pushed all of that forward and hopefully lit a fire to get some of those pieces in order. And when we look at implications further, that periphery of kind of, as referenced here on the slide, pharmacists or landlords, etc., have been brought forward from the periphery to kind of be in that essential services group, meaning they are essential for everyone, including vulnerable populations, and we need to incorporate them further, hence the integrated coordinated access. And finally, we're seeing a lot of respite staffing options, cross-training, and job sharing amongst communities. I think that will continue forward. And next, we're going to have the lovely folks in Lethbridge talk about the work that they have done for rolling out their integrated coordinated access during COVID.
Okay, I believe David is going to start us off.
Sure. So my name is David Gabert. I am the project coordinator here at Canadian Mental Health Association, Alberta South Region. And actually, we can jump right to the next slide if that works for you, Alina. So one of the things, just a little bit of background, we here in Lethbridge, sort of like Jenn just referenced, we had some amazing experts in our community. We had some amazing organizations that were doing really incredible work. And one of the things we noticed even a few years ago was that we really wanted to map out what was going on in our community, make sure that we're avoiding potential gaps in social services, in our delivery system, in our model that we have running here in Lethbridge. And that was how we got first involved with HelpSeeker in the process, and the City of Lethbridge led the way very nicely in that. And I think it all came to fruition during COVID here in Lethbridge as well, to really push this. So we really wanted to take that fulsome approach to everything and look at those different social issues that are coming up repetitively in our city, both pre-COVID and post-COVID. Things like homelessness, addiction, substance use, safety, migration, domestic violence, health and mortality, pardon me. All those sort of different topics that we see on a regular basis. And how can we leverage the relationships that already exist here? So looking at the Housing First system here in Lethbridge, for example, there's a very strong relationship between the case management and integrated coordinated access that CMHA does and our Lethbridge Housing Authority here. So really, how can we work together and strengthen those relationships and really drive those forward? And sort of out of this, in order to put everything together, I'm going to pass things off to Lori to talk about the pods that were set up as a part of COVID. Next slide, please.
Thank you. So just a little bit about me quickly to put some context in what I'm going to share. I work for the City of Lethbridge, but I normally work in the Recreation and Culture Department. However, as happened across the country, COVID hit quite quickly, and we found ourselves in a state of emergency, not out of the blue, but not with a lot of time to prepare. And so at that point, because I have a bit of a background in addictions and child welfare work, I was asked if I'd be willing to be repurposed to help with the social response. So I've essentially changed departments over the last couple months and am in this role temporarily. Part of what was really a benefit was the fact that the City of Lethbridge was in the midst of putting out this ICA approach and working on it, but COVID hit at a crazy time for our community social development department, because they were just in the midst of actually putting out the RFSQs to groups and doing that work. So I came in and COVID came at a very critical time. So the work for the rest of the department continued on the path they were taking into implementing ICA, and I focused more on the social response. The real benefit to me was that we were already doing a lot of work with HelpSeeker, as David said. So right off the bat, I was working with Alina, and we were trying to identify what we knew were going to be areas of need for COVID, based on the already always existing areas of need, which are, you know, some of the things you see on the screen right now, like food security and transportation, parenting. We threw around what we were going to call these for a little bit. We landed on the word pod. And so we initially started with probably about 8 pods. And these were sort of the major things that we knew about. But we're up to about 20 pods right now. Part of that has been because we've been able to use the data collected from the HelpSeeker website, from social media, from the city's website, and from Google to sort of see what are the community's actual needs. And we've been very fortunate in that CMHA and Volunteer Lethbridge were also already very involved in the ICA approach that Lethbridge was moving to. So all working in collaboration, this pod structure was created. And the manifestation of it online is actually through a website called Slack, which is essentially, I feel like it's sort of like a Facebook, where you've got a feed where you can all share stuff, but there are sub feeds. So we have actually each pod has its own channel, and anybody on the Slack can join the channels in which their organization works in, or if they're just interested in seeing what is going on. Alina, can you change the next slide? So once we come up with all of the pods, I think the most interesting thing for probably all of us was not only identifying the service providers that we all know already exist doing this good work in these areas, but in the case of COVID, who else maybe actually belonged in those. So for example, looking at our food pod, we had the things you would expect, such as the food banks, the soup kitchen, Meals on Wheels. But we also realized that there were restaurants were playing a role here in Lethbridge and Alberta. Restaurants were pretty much always allowed to have curbside pickup. So that existed. Grocery stores were doing deliveries. Delivery services played a key role. So our pods actually grew to being much more than just social services agencies, and they became opened up to the business community. But one of the focuses that we really took was everybody in the community wanted to help out, it seemed. And so we had a lot of new informal organizations try to start up, and I feel this way, especially around the volunteer delivery service. For example, we had a group of university students who were just, you know, we will deliver anything to anyone. And so what we actually ended up doing with the pods, and this work is still ongoing, but it's been actually quite successful, is we've tried to identify redundancies in services, knowing that we have minimal resources in financial and people, volunteers and staff, to do all the work that is needed. So rather than working with people to duplicate resources that exist, we've been trying to take interested organizations and interested people on the street to look at the gaps that have been identified and figure out how those already existing resources can be leveraged to do more with the people that are wanting to help out. And it's been actually quite successful. We've had, I've worked with 2 groups that wanted to actually establish themselves as not-for-profits, and instead of doing so, they're actually supporting already existing groups that really had need for more resources, that had the time and willingness to learn a lot and step in. And these individuals have been a huge benefit to our community. And I just want to add on the side that over time, we've actually been able to utilize the data to create pods that I would never have thought of at the front end. So for example, we actually have a pets pod. And that is because throughout COVID, especially when people were at home a lot more, the number of pet adoptions went through the roof. But we also had the knowledge from all the pet rescues in the animal shelter that there were concerns that as people returned to work or became unable to feed these animals, that maybe there was going to be a lot of abandonment or people, you know, just trying to give away their animals. So to try to be less reactionary and more proactive, we actually created a pet pod and communicate with the rescues in the animal shelter to find out what their needs are and what the emerging trends are, so that we can do what we can to help them all work together to respond to those. Alina? So the first 48 hours were pretty crazy, and I don't know that I actually slept in that first 48 hours. And Alina was by my side the whole time. So obviously the pod system was what we created, and then we reached out, once we sort of knew what some of the pods were going to be, we reached out to the service providers that we knew in the community that were doing good work. And we just explained to them what we were going to do and asked them to help us identify who else needed to be a part of the pod system, and to invite those people to work with us. The other thing that we did, and again, this was a huge blessing for me not coming from this world, HelpSeeker, the website, already existed for Lethbridge, and it had existed for the reason it exists, which is to help people find the connections to services they need, focus mostly on social services. But we were able to open that up almost immediately and say, if you are offering any service to the community right now, we want you to create presence on HelpSeeker. So if you are a pharmacy that is still open, if you are a grocery store that has special hours for seniors, because right off the bat, there was so much confusion about what was open, what would remain open, and what maybe wouldn't be open. So we expanded HelpSeeker right off the front end and got a lot of media coverage and a lot of people using HelpSeeker. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to David.
Yeah, I think the other thing we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure the information in HelpSeeker was very valid. So CMHA's ran an information and referral program here in Lethbridge for a number of years, and we all have learned the lesson that our referrals, our information is only as good as what is up to date. So what Lori said is exactly true, but we also wanted to make sure it got to the hands of people who, because they were isolating and were accessing information or referral services at the library or at social service agencies, and now we're finding doors that were closed due to COVID, that we had ways to get the information to them in an offline manner. And so I know in those first 48 hours, the first couple weeks even, we had lots of conversations with the team at HelpSeeker to make sure there were printable PDFs that were available, to make sure that we could email them out to our social service agencies so they could get them to the hands of those individual clients, so that they still had places to turn throughout the COVID pandemic as well. Next slide, Alina. So one of the other things we wanted to do here in Lethbridge is we really wanted to get ahead of what we thought were going to be a number of mental health concerns. And so one of the things we wanted to do was set up wellness checks. So we worked with a number of different organizations here in Lethbridge. You can see all of their logos up at the top there. To start doing wellness checks and give a way for people who are isolating and may not have anybody else to talk to really give them someone to check in with them. To have that conversation. And it wasn't necessarily always about basic needs or well-being, but it was also just keeping in touch with somebody, just having that continual conversation about how you're doing and what's going on, and knowing how to escalate it to other services if you need it. So whether you needed to go to the CMHA crisis services, whether you needed referrals through HelpSeeker, whether you needed a translator through Lethbridge Family Services, we had those operations and those options in place. So we were really able to do and try and get ahead of a lot of this. So working in the crisis sector with CMHA, we really wanted to make sure we were catching people before they got to that breaking point, and really make sure that we were touching down and targeting those vulnerable populations, seniors or families. We've seen a huge trend in terms of parents who are parenting from home and working from home at the same time, and what that's doing to their mental health. So giving them the options and ways to connect in the community, and finding new ways to partner as well through the wellness checks. Next slide, Alina. So we also wanted to make sure that any of the things we're setting up out of our response are things that can also grow and evolve into the future. So we want to make sure that we have the data on what COVID interactions are happening. We want to look at what services are being set up, what's being searched for, what is available in our community, and then taking a look at those. And I know we've had lots of conversations amongst the pods and on Slack about what services we want to see going forward. What are going to be the long-term sort of ramifications of what we're going through here in Lethbridge? What services are still necessary? The wellness check, for example, is something that we want to keep going out of this. Next slide, please. I'll pass it back to Lori on this one.
So what we have done is we've utilized HelpSeeker to help us pull data from the website on people's use of HelpSeeker specific to Lethbridge. As people were updating their HelpSeeker listings or adding their HelpSeeker listings, we did also create a COVID category, and we asked everybody to check that was providing COVID services or services during COVID, so that if people came to HelpSeeker and right off the bat in front of them was the question, are you looking for COVID services, that would help scale out what would show up in their search. And this map here is a map of Lethbridge and where the services are located, along with the demand or request for services over the time of COVID. So you can see in February, this would be what we would consider, I guess, our norm or standard use of HelpSeeker, looking for supports and where they are located. But in March, COVID blew up, and the map shows, and a lot of our service providers are in that downtown that area. And the previous slide showed you, like, just between May and June, we've had over 13,000 searches on the HelpSeeker website for Lethbridge for COVID specific needs or services that are available in Lethbridge. So things are starting to slow down a bit, as shown by the April and May maps, but HelpSeeker has been able to provide us with a tremendous amount of data that has allowed us to be very flexible in how we respond and to the emerging trends, and to be able to see what the needs of the community are right now. And as David said, what are some of the things that we're going to need to look at doing long term. And it's through this and a whole bunch of analytics that are provided to us very regularly that we've been able to respond and be very flexible to responding to COVID here in Lethbridge. And I'll pass over to Shanda.
Thanks, Lori. All right, so I'm Shanda. I am the program specialist for the homeless initiatives here in the City of Grande Prairie. And my part of the deck is going to be specifically tailored to leveraging system navigators. Switch. Thank you. So giving a bit of background on the City of Grande Prairie, we're not new to system-based work. We have had plan to end homelessness since 2009. We have been operating previously with a centralized assessment team versus a coordinated access team. So I'll get into how we have activated our coordinated access team in a little bit. But in terms of what we've been doing really great work, both within the homelessness sector and the peripheral service sector for vulnerable populations. One of the key identifiers for us to have an integrated coordinated access system was that we saw recurring themes of gaps being brought up for service delivery within the community. And that really drove home the fact that we need to do some consultation. We need to switch up what we were doing in order to provide supports effectively for individuals. And what happened there was that we had some reaching home funding, and we did decide to consult and hire a consultant, so Turner Strategies, to do our community engagement piece in early 2020. So that was pre-COVID. There was really heavy-duty consultation, think labs, varying demographics that sat in on that, on those consultation pieces. And from there, we had a lot of community stakeholders that support the collective impact piece, and they really do want to drive home change. And so that is a key foundational piece for us in Grande Prairie that we've seen huge success in. And so with our integrated coordinated access piece, one of the main drives for this was including those peripheral support services into the homelessness sector as a big picture idea. So we needed to really focus on that prevention piece and focus on that entire social safety net in order to have a holistic approach to coordinated access in the city. Can switch. So some of the feedback that from our consultations is that everybody is navigating in some capacity in some way. So they are surviving throughout this crazy world and getting the services that they need. But in terms of it being a smooth transition from service to service and discussions happening, it may not have been quite there yet. So who's doing the actual service provision was a question. It's there, who's actually doing it. Part particularly from our lived experience individuals, they did stipulate that the service navigation is frustrating, it's time consuming, and sometimes it's just not possible. A big part of that was transportation. So if you know anything about the City of Grande Prairie, we have really harsh winters. We are spread out quite a bit in terms of where our services are located, and we do have a transit system, but sometimes it is hard to manage. So it can be quite frustrating. Some of the things was keeping information up to date across all websites and platforms. It's time consuming and frustrating again, because there are varying platforms that we're trying to make it cohesive and have information in one database. And so it was a little bit fragmented there. Logistics are changing weekly, so the providers and those seeking help need to know where to look, and that's where HelpSeeker comes in. And then a method to train new and temporary frontline staff on local resources is needed. So that's the community feedback that we got from the consultation. And we can switch there. So some of the key ICA components for Grande Prairie was digital navigation. So we did need a one-stop shop for individuals to access online for information. So that's through HelpSeeker. We have partnered with United Way to take on HelpSeeker, that app. And individuals can access that freely. It's accessible to anyone, anywhere. One of the key pieces to that, as boards in Lethbridge did state, is that our service providers need to ensure that their information is up to date on there. We don't want to have duplication or individuals being referred or going and accessing services that are not correct for them. And then I will dive down into the system navigators. So one of the key pieces of our integrated coordinated access system is having those system navigators trained and mobilized to provide in-person support at key access sites across GP. We have really honed in on them with our COVID response. And then we have our integrated service delivery table. So that is a coordinated approach for our complex needs individuals that have significant barriers to becoming either stably housed or reaching whatever goals they have indicated that they need. And so there's key service providers at that table. The backbone of that table is Alberta Health Services. And then we have very strategic membership ranging from enforcement to health, to housing, to anything in between. And so we are working diligently to get that up and running. Switch there. So one of the beautiful things that we had going for us, I would say, pre-COVID, was that we had the consultations, and we had this beautiful package for a rollout of integrated coordinated access for the City of Grande Prairie. There was really nice dates. We had timelines on when we were going to do this and transfer from a centralized system into a coordinated system. And then COVID hit, and it basically laughed in our faces and, you know, good luck, you're going to have to roll this out much sooner than you were anticipating. And so at our tables, we had to really sit down and look at that proposal for rollout and see what we had control over, who we could leverage, what we could leverage in order to ensure that individuals that are needing housing support specifically for the needs that we were seeing in the community at that time, that they could still access those services and not have a gap in service provision for them. Part of our rollout package was really focusing on level 1 and 2 system navigators, so those prevention and diversion workers, lightest touch possible, making sure that they're navigating all of those peripheral service providers. And so originally we were going to focus on level 1 and 2s. And when COVID hit, we had to work backwards, and we had to focus on our level 3. So those are the really key, really expert individuals in the community that they know how to do varying assessments. They know the systems inside and out, and we had to latch onto them. And so how we did this was we said, okay, so we need level 3s. Who are level 3s in the community? I had an idea in my head, just being the program specialist and working with a lot of individuals within our contracted agencies and in the peripherals as well. And so we were like, okay, how can we get them on board? And really, really short notice, because we were operating 3 months before we originally intended to roll out our ICA platform. And what happened, I approached Jenn with HelpSeeker and I said, hey, so, you know, is there a way that we can get some kind of onboarding package for these community service providers that we will be attempting and approaching for level 3 navigators, so they know exactly what we're asking for. And they did provide, and kudos to them. It was a great onboarding package. So what we did was we gave them the onboarding package. We had a big meeting with all of our executive directors that we were approaching. We said, this is the need. These are the things that have been changing within service provision, and are you in? And one of the beautiful things with the service providers that we have now is that there was no resistance to that. Even with the really short time frame that we gave them to get a formal MOU signed in for the level 3 navigators, there was no resistance. And that really just goes to show the buy-in that our community has with a coordinated access approach, because they were all in. And so I really need to give kudos to our community partners with that first cohort of level 3 navigators. They worked within a week of getting those contracts signed with their boards, and that's kind of unheard of. So thank you very much. And it was seen as you're keeping the resources on the ground versus we're clawing them back. We were utilizing those level 3 really keen experts on our systems in a time of a pandemic. And so that was hugely beneficial. One of the things about when we were doing the level 3s that I had an idea in my head, but we did give the autonomy to the agencies that we were approaching to identify their experts, because they do know their staff better than I do. And they did coincide quite well. And so that gave them a level of ownership as well. So they're ensuring the continuity of services for high needs and the homeless population. So as I said, we moved from a centralized assessment to a coordinated system with COVID. And we still needed that kind of centralized pillar to be able to refer to the level 3s to get those assessments done. And how this works is that with the City of Grande Prairie and our Family Community Support Services, FCSS, we configured some positions so that we could still have that pillar in the community, that individuals could phone in, have that main line, and then that individual would do the administrative work. And to fan that out for our level 3 navigators. And how that works is we use the app Microsoft Teams. So all of our level 3 navigators are on Microsoft Teams, as well as me, as well as our ICA lead that is that main line right now. And so she makes the profile on our efforts to outcome database, or your HMIS system. And she will fan out their case number. And the level 3, whoever has the time that day, will pick up that assessment, and they will let everybody else know on that chat that they are going to connect with that person within the next 24, 48 hours for an assessment, and we will go from there. And how that works is they feed into a larger system, and our ICA lead will prioritize them. And we have a weekly meeting, we call it a hub table meeting, where we do the appropriate matching and referral for our housing teams. And so all the level 3s are on there. We really deliberate and make sure that we're doing the best matching and referral we can. And once it is a consensus at that hub table meeting, we will let the client know that they've been appropriately matched, and if they say yes or no, and we will move forward from there. So it really was a community approach, 3 months early, and really big buy-in for there. So I do need to give kudos to our community for that. So digital navigation, leveraging all social services in the community to ensure prevention, early intervention supports is accessible for all. So one of the really interesting pieces when we did our consultation that we got back from particularly their lived experience and who they utilize to help them navigate the systems is their family doctor. And that was a huge learning for me. I basically I thought that they would utilize other services, but their family doctor was doing this informal navigation. And so that was really clear to me that we need to focus on those peripheral service providers outside of homelessness funded contracts. And so that's one part of it. And then the other part was that they really do utilize their family and friends and the internet to see where they can go and get appropriate services. And so there is this big drive to get all of our appropriate services consolidated onto the HelpSeeker app and updated, and our service agencies own their profile on HelpSeeker, so that our individuals accessing that are not led astray, and they have up-to-date information and they know exactly where to go. And switch. So how our system navigators work, we have level 1, level 2, and level 3. So as you can see, level 1's much larger cohort than level 2s and level 3s. Those are your basic navigators. They're doing that informal navigation just in their day-to-day jobs. Level 2, there's a bit more to it. There's a little bit more meat into how they need to know the services. They need to know the navigation. They need to know when to refer individuals to a level 3 if they need higher support services. And then the level 3 cohort is very small. It is really keen on experts in the community, and so you have to be very strategic in who your level 3s are. So level 1's kind of the profile of them, individuals who interface with the general public and receive questions on service options and locations. So for example, those receptionist positions in primary care offices, like I said, for doctors, library staff, church positions, and school administrators. So they're the ones that, even in informal conversations, if somebody is coming in for a teeth cleaning and they want to know if you know where they can get a bus pass, well, that's kind of a level one job, is so that they know how they can do those referrals. And then a level 2 is an individual that is in position of supporting wayfinding and navigation on behalf of their agencies. So resource navigators is family resource centers, newcomer services, and senior agencies, etc. So how we see in the City of Grande Prairie level 1s and level 2s sitting in with the larger picture is our FCSS funded agencies they will be primarily level 1s and 2s. There will be some level 3s in there. And then our level 3s are the experts. They're already in those roles of system navigation in Grande Prairie. They're trained to complete assessments to facilitate eligibility requirements. So for example, where we have our level 3 sitting right now, we have them at the youth shelter, so our Sunrise House, our GP Friendship Center, our Northreach Society, Street Outreach, and our Canadian Mental Health Association, and then our Center Point Facilitation. And so our housing teams are a big chunk, but we also have prevention and diversion sitting in there as a level 3. We have street outreach sitting in as a level 3. And then we have, we're working towards more level 3s as well. So that's really exciting. But when you dial it down and figure out your level 1s, level 2s, level 3s, be very strategic in how you want to work those system navigators and who you already see as experts in the community, and leveraging their knowledge and their expertise, because it's going to work in your favor. This is a work in progress, but we are working towards tiering our services. So the low need, mid, high need, and then high need. So the A services, there's early childhood parenting, food center, recreation program, mental health prevention. So that's where your digital navigation comes into play. That's a lot of level 1 work. The well-being screener that is currently being worked on with HelpSeeker for Grande Prairie. And so that's your lightest touch possible approach. And then you have your mid to high need. So those are community locations. So right now we are really massaging when post-COVID hits and we reopen where our physical sites will be, because everything right now is being done digitally, even our assessments. And so with our system navigators, we do need to be able to give physical locations to them for individuals to access those supports. And tier B is where they will get assessed and see where they fit in terms of their level of need. and then you have your high need. And so that is where integrated service delivery table comes into play. As you can see from the amount of dots underneath each of these tiers, the majority of the work will happen in tier 1, so level 1s, potentially level 2s, and then the majority of your work, it may flow to tier B and then tier C. But with tier C, that's where your intensive case management comes into play, your PSH and your specialized addiction treatment. Oftentimes when we think about how can we support the most vulnerable, we do focus a lot on those high-end users and try to funnel our money towards there. And where you can see you may need to shift your thinking in terms of in what tier do you really want to focus on and what tier do you really need certain experts at the table, and you can hone in on them. So post-COVID, some ideas that we have and what we're working on. We are going to continue to engage service providers outside of homelessness. So as I said right now, when COVID hit and our level 3s, we focused on homelessness. We focused on navigating the homelessness system because we saw contract changes, we saw all sorts of things happen, and COVID on top of that. So we focused on those level 3s. And so now we really need to engage in those peripheral support services, and those are level 1s and level 2s. So who's at, where are they going to be located, what does this training look like? We are working right now on web-based training. So I do have a colleague that is specifically working on the training for level 1s and 2s. So we're really excited to expand that and get that up and running. And then further exploration of other necessary level 3s. We have already seen, so we've only been doing this for about a month and a half, and we've already seen that we need a bigger, broader scope of cohorts for level 3s because we are missing some key places there. So we currently are having works a level 3 to be identified and worked out of our supervised consumption site, so it's very exciting. Our health navigator, as well as getting our women's shelters on board and having level 3 because they have transitional housing and they do feed into the larger system with our homeless initiatives. And so it's very exciting. And one of the things that's really beautiful about this is that we are giving a lot of autonomy to our agencies to decide, number one, who their level 3 is and how they want to work it. And one of the shining lights for me is the women's shelter right now. They are actually changing up a position to focus solely on, well, part of their job will be focusing solely on getting every single frontline worker there on the up and up on being a level 1, level 2, or level 3, and how can we feed into the integrated coordinated access system. And there's a lot of buy-in here, and everybody's really excited, and they're just chomping at the bit to be able to really dial down and get this system up and running to its fullest potential. And then the other part that we're working on that I alluded to a bit there was we are working on a well-being screener for level 1s, level 2s, also level 3s. But that well-being screener will be specifically to leverage our prevention programs. And so they will understand kind of where they can refer and assist individuals when they are presenting for services. And I think that's it. So I will turn it over to Dena.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Shanda. So we are in the early stages of working with HelpSeeker to integrate all of our community social development infrastructure policies into our coordinated access activities, as well as our overall systems approach that we activated in fall of 2017. And so COVID brought some interesting conditions to our community, but definitely the work that we've already done with HelpSeeker has supported us in this journey. So that's what I'm going to cover today. So as I briefly mentioned, we received the community of Abbotsford, or the City of Abbotsford on behalf of the community, in May of 2015, received $400,000 roughly through a contribution funding through Service Canada's Research and Innovation funding stream. And that was to develop a coordinated intake and referral system in collaboration with our community. What emerged was the Abbotsford Homelessness Prevention and Response System. So it's a collaboratively owned, activated and invested system across our communities. So that includes over 47 community partners in the nonprofit sector, business sector, community organizations, faith communities, and residents. So with that, we were able to activate our COVID response planning as a community very soon, and working with the mandates with our province, being able to identify local resources that could support that. As well as a part of that was looking at transportation needs. So it's interesting that Shanda said that as well for Grande Prairie. Abbotsford is the largest municipality in land area in British Columbia. So we have a lot of land area to cover. In addition to that, we're very grateful for being one of the newly appointed designated communities for Service Canada Reaching Home. And our focus will be Western Fraser Valley. So we, in collaboration with our community partners and BC Housing, activated the Tier 1 Community Van Initiative to respond to the transportation needs for individuals to access the emergency response centers, the isolation units, and to and from the shelter system and key health center locations in Abbotsford and Mission. And so it's being reported that it's been a very beneficial service. So we are now in the works with 3 of our business partners or community partners, the Indo-Canadian Business Association, MSA Ford, and the Auto Mall Collective, to actually roll out the Tier 2 transportation initiative that will be ongoing support for individuals in the shelter supportive housing systems here in Abbotsford. So with that, though, we recognize the value of the communication access as part of our infrastructure that we require. So we look at our community infrastructure through built infrastructure, social infrastructure, and communications. And we know and recognize that Fraser Valley has kind of historically underfunded to respond to these needs across the housing, health, and employment community integration sectors. So with the communication access, it's through the HelpSeeker apps and also working with Luminative Housing for community voicemail for people who don't have access to telephones or Wi-Fi. We now are able to support greater communication access across providers, across systems, and especially for the individuals who need access to this information most. So we're looking forward to continuing to work through those items as a community. Food systems access was key. We recognized that right off the bat, this was one of our priority needs with COVID. Our Archway Food Bank, they adapted quickly. They are really the cornerstone agency for food access here in our community, and they work very closely with our community partners and through satellite locations throughout Abbotsford. So they adapted their services through drive-through. They activated faith community participation through volunteers to increase the number of hampers. We worked closely with our school district to assess the at-risk families, and also closely with our Indigenous communities to ensure that they received the city's support in advocating for bulk purchasing to ensure their communities were able to stay home and stay safe. So also we've called that the CARE initiative. Sarah for Women is one of our largest women's service providers. We connected them with Abbotsford Christian School because the students were at home, and that gave us the opportunity to support the development of hygiene care packs that were gender-based and specific for the various areas of. So when people came into the emergency response center isolation units, they were presented a hygiene pack. The students were able to participate in that activity as well and learn a bit more about the COVID response efforts. We're actually going to continue that initiative, and we're going to focus now on extreme heat, making sure people have the things that they need during the summer. And then we're able to share and leverage the funding and the contributions then to make this a year-round initiative. I also sit on the Abbotsford Early Years Leadership Table, and so that's what has been a really good opportunity, especially through COVID, to recognize what are the childcare needs for our first responders, frontline workers, and also working very closely to understand how COVID is challenging family systems, right? The tensions, the stress that may be emerging. And so we're working closely actually and learning from Lethbridge around the mental health check-in initiative that is currently in development with our community partner, Abbotsford Restorative Justice Advocacy Association. Our Indigenous community partners, we are really leaning in, looking forward to building a very strong relationship with Luma Native Housing as our steward leader in our efforts as a community entity for the hub of the Fraser Valley to engage all nations in Western Fraser Valley through all of the policy work that's underway and our community entity work. And lastly, Refresh Mobile Showers is an example in our community of how through our collaborative work, we were able to develop mobile access to services for our most vulnerable. So they are also activating and go throughout the Abbotsford community to offer showers and friendship. So the City of Abbotsford, we have been given award by Service Canada Reaching Home to administer the Service Canada Reaching Home program for Western Fraser Valley. As part of this, we're entering into a tripartite relationship with Luma Native Housing and Van City Community Foundation to help build capacity in the areas of the Indigenous community engagement and support, as well as the financial stewardship of these funds. So we are focused on embedding reconciliation and restorative practice, as well as equity into our second generation systems work. So that means all policies that we're developing and activities will have this lens applied to it. So some of our priorities will include coordinated access enhancement to build out our Abbotsford Homelessness Prevention and Response System, which is a cross system across the housing, shelter, health, income, employment, and community integration. We will turn our focused attention on to strengthening linkages to our public safety and community safety pieces through activating situation table in conjunction with coordinated access, looking at integrated court through a healing pathway model, as well as looking at a healthy transitions model for individuals transitioning from corrections into community. In addition to that, we recognized through COVID the immediacy of the food access needs here in our community. Fraser Valley is one of the highest producing agricultural areas in Canada, yet we have barriers to food access for families and individuals. So this gives us a real opportunity to focus our attention on those gaps, to scale those up in a way that we're building out our networks from field to table, table to food literacy, and developing this ecosystems approach that fosters community resiliency. In addition to that, all of this is linked to University of Fraser Valley's Social and Health Data Innovation Lab, which is embedded into our systems work as well. Here in British Columbia, our local Abbotsford COVID community response team activated just prior to the province exercising their mandate to ensure their statutory agencies supported and coordinated resources in all BC communities for COVID response. So we as a community then turned our attention to supporting our provincial statutory agency partners to identify locations, to mobilize local resources in collaboration with the provincial agencies to ensure that we had access and support for our most vulnerable in Western Fraser Valley. In addition to that, the Tier 2 resources included mobile testing that was overseen by Fraser Health and our Division of Family Practice. And they went to the shelters right away and supportive housing to ensure that people had access to testing. And in addition to that, we worked closely with our local business community to identify potential hotel locations to transfer that information over to BC Housing so they could secure those arrangements appropriately for hotel accommodations. And in addition, we as a community mobilized the transportation and the various care, as well as the tertiary supports through our outreach-based access teams. This was significant for us to actually be able to put numbers to what, as we work very closely with our community partners and we activate through systems and working groups to be able to correlate what the observations were in the field with respect to the interactions in HelpSeeker. So we really saw a significant uptake in use with the HelpSeeker system. HelpSeeker team helped us right off the bat to ensure all of our resources on our HelpSeeker system were identified for COVID resources, that information was up to date. So individuals and families and agencies searching understood how this impacted service levels or maybe modified the services that they were seeking. But definitely the top 5 searches looking for COVID related resources, clothing, addictions, financial matters, and shelter were consistent with what we were hearing from everyone out in the field. So when we're looking at this immediate emergency response efforts that took place in February and March, we then recognized early on that we needed to start taking a look at how we were sharing and leveraging resources, funding, and focus in a way that we could scale up and transition to ever-changing conditions or this new norm that we're all facing. So that is where I think the policy work is coming to play, that we're working with HelpSeeker about, to ensure that we have a solid community social development infrastructure policy framework that will support the sustainable systems approach. Because we see it from the individual all the way into the community, that we have much opportunity to be able to leverage these resources. People have stepped up, our agencies have stepped up during this time with significant commitment, but it's also amplifying where the needs are for deeper high impact investment in our community. And especially, again, through this equitable, respectful, and restorative manner that we will be embedding into all of our systems practice.
So thank you very much for that. That was awesome. Lots of questions I'm sure are going to be coming in shortly. So we'll give everybody a chance to throw your questions to everyone in the chat box. In the meantime, if you have an interest in the next topic, here's the time for it. July 23rd at 11 a.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Mountain Time for those of you in Calgary. And the topic on this one is going to be around tech innovation and COVID social recovery. So for those of you that are interested in things like machine learning or artificial intelligence applications to social issues during COVID, we're going to have some cool projects that are presenting on what they're up to from all over the country. And one of them might show you a couple of demonstrations and prototypes that are being worked on as well. So definitely put that in your calendar if it's of interest, and I'm sure Jenny's going to follow up with some additional reminders to those of you that are part of our email list as well. And of course, if you have questions in the meantime, absolutely, let's throw those in the chat box, and then we'll get everybody back on and answering those questions for you. Okay, so a couple of things here. One that I saw, and I'll bring it up to everybody, from Rosbina. She's asking, you're alluding to websites being a necessity. So I think the question might be, is a website critical to integrated coordinated access efforts? I have a bit of a bias towards saying yes, you need, but it doesn't have to be a website. It's just, you have to have some kind of a digital presence for sure, because lots of help-seeking behaviors have moved digital right now. So having a digital presence or at least a digital strategy is going to be really important. But I'll flip it over to Shanda, Lori, Jen, and Dena, and Dave, if you guys have any thoughts on whether on what the role digital components have in this work. Anybody want to take that on?
I could take that question on. I think for us, we definitely recognize we're at a stage in our systems work where we really do have to focus on the digital equity strategy, and to ensure that all of the pieces of the system, we're collecting and capturing the shared outcomes and key indicators in a way that are helping to inform systems improvement. So we're really looking forward to continuing our work with HelpSeeker to understand how we can implement a digital tech stack into our work to capture that real-time data in a way where we're able to inform the various community partners, and also working within local government. It's extremely important that our elected officials have that informed kind of community business case, so they better understand too how to advocate to senior levels of government, and how we as a community can share and leverage those resources to shift and adapt to meet priority needs. I think that also allows us the space to have those deeper conversations that we do need to have around equity and social inclusion, because then, you know what, we're looking at objective kind of numbers in front of us in a way that will give us space to have those deeper conversations that, especially now as we see COVID has highlighted and intensified the inequity in many of our systems, and and the voices are speaking to that as well.
Great.
Alina, can I also just speak to tech in general?
Yes, definitely.
So I agree with everything that Dena just said, and I know David had talked about yes, that we definitely have acknowledged that this is the way to go, but that also remembering that the community doesn't necessarily all have access, and so finding unique ways to get information out to those. So like we have actually utilized the food bank hampers throughout COVID to send messages to those families by sharing information that our parenting pod, for example, puts together on programs and how to access them if you don't have the internet. But the other thing with technology that I think is really important is the communication between the service providers and the Slack channel. So just while this webinar was going on, I noticed in Slack, because I have the app on my phone, so I get notifications that there had been the childcare providers, because childcare is a huge issue here, just like it is, I'm sure, across the country for people returning to work. And one's, posted, hey, we're looking for a second space on the west side to offer childcare, and somebody else jumped up with, oh, go to this place because they've been really good and supported us with space in the past. And so the communication and the problem solving is so much quicker when you have that, and it's not 1,000 emails. I think technology plays the lead in moving forward with the reaction to everything day to day and crisis.
I know, speaking from CMHA for a moment, over the years we've done a lot of information referral, and I know our tech strategy, while we've always been online, what HelpSeeker's really allowed us to do is have that one place where there's up-to-date information, and I think that's been critical to us. So like Lori said, when we're sending out those information through the food hampers or through Slack or whatever it might be, HelpSeeker's been a great place for us and our staff who are working frontline with a lot of service providers to really make sure that it's one website that's up to date, that it's one stop that we can go to and make sure all the information is relevant and valid for our community members.
Excellent. I think the next one, let's say, it's from Saima, and this might be for Jenn, because you're actually an ex-CHF employee, but it's about asking how this is the same or different from Calgary Homeless Foundation's coordinated access and assessment.
Yeah, so integrated coordinated access, I like to kind of view in my mind as it's a purposeful approach from the planning through to the implementation and rollout stages of bringing in the prevention and early intervention and periphery partners. I think knowing the Calgary Coordinated Access and Assessment model really well, that's not to say that doesn't include other partners and systems in, but it was once that was operating efficiently enough that we could start exploring those things. So a few years in, that didn't happen overnight. So integrated coordinated access, I would say that the difference is in your right from the get-go, your who you are including from that first point.
And those of you that aren't familiar, the Calgary Homeless Foundation's CAA model is about coordinating their agencies working on homelessness. So it's that, I would say that's a big thing, is that it's got a homelessness focus. If you heard the term safety hub or what did we call it, situation table, that's the kind of equivalent of that model, but in the justice sector. There's also similar ones in child intervention and health as well. So this whole idea of having a coordinated approach to get access to the right services, it's great, but it needs to be more than just one sector at a time. And the way you structure it, if you have that bigger lens, it's going to be very different if you take this holistic approach from the start versus if you try to kind of put it back together. Because now we see this in some communities that have like 5 different tables. So justice has one, police has one, homelessness has one, domestic violence has one, and it becomes really tough to kind of mash it all up because everybody's really married to what they built in their own processes, and I get that. But it's for those of you that are considering kind of if we're wanting to get to this holistic model eventually, then thinking ahead, because what you might be putting into place from a silo perspective might actually prohibit you from making that move later on. So just thinking about that upfront is helpful. Cool. Anybody else on that? Probably just Jen, because she's the CHFer in the house. What's the process of working with HelpSeeker to implement systems change initiative? Oh, that depends on the systems change initiative that you're talking about. Sometimes it's, okay, I'm not going to say ICA is easy because it's not easy work, but there's a process where you can, and Shanda, you're laughing because but there's a whole series of community engagement. So all that stuff that Shanda was referring to, and Dena as well, and Lori and Dave, they're already like a couple years into this work, but it's actually not HelpSeeker. Like, we're just a tool in the community's toolbox. The communities are the ones that mobilize and say, okay, we're over it. This lack of coordination, this fragmentation, it's not working for us anymore. So there's already this appetite for transformation. And so our role is to really support the community in that, but they're the ones doing the heavy lifting. Our job is to bring in the technology stack, and sometimes it's things like, hey, let's use Slack for this, or let's build a well-being screener if there isn't one there. Our apps and system mapping, that's something we've developed through doing this work in other communities, where they kept saying, like, we need to know what's functioning so that we can make referrals, that otherwise we're all just spinning our wheels. So lots of it is just working with the community and having this agile process to do community engagement, get the leaders on board, the decision makers and these different systems on board. Another one is actually doing the lived experience design lab, so that we build something that actually makes sense for the people we're serving versus making our lives easier. Frontline, same thing. We talked about design labs with frontline folks. That's how we discovered that we had these awesome navigators that we wanted to tap into. In Lethbridge, the navigators like CMHA was doing this stuff in libraries already. So I'm like, well, why would we not, you know, leverage something like that and amp it up as opposed to recreating it? So you can see from all the communities how different it is, because the concept is the same, which is connect people to help, but the way it manifests has to be localized and driven by the community. And again, like you saw from Dena, the focus on food security and transportation, that's a huge thing in Abbotsford. So for us to, you know, discount that because we have a formula, it doesn't make sense. So it's working with the community, and we're a resource would be my kind of short answer to it.
Alina, I'm just gonna pop in. There's a couple questions. There's one about
Sure.
PPEs. So where do they fit in on that chart that you initially, your first couple of slides there? Is it a basic need or a safety or a health?
Sorry, what was the first part of that question, Jenny?
With regards to PPEs, she wondered.
Oh, okay. Protective equipment. Yeah. Does anybody want to take a run at that? Dena, you might be the closest to the PPE question and coordinating that.
Yeah, with respect to, personal protection equipment. Yeah, that came to light in various ways, like through all three tiers of our COVID response, basically, is, you know, how do we support everyone with the proper access to the PPE. So the province was making an effort, but they also asked, you know, the community, can you help us with this resource drive? So that was really basic. But in addition to that, it was taking a look at modifications to services, making sure our service providers had up-to-date information on COVID resources, best practice, safe work practice. And then I think that also feeds into the overall kind of mental wellness initiatives, as well as just the emotional first aid that's required. Want to note that as we have a global COVID pandemic, we also continue to have an opioid crisis in our community, you know, in British Columbia. And so we've experienced overdoses in our community alongside COVID. So I think PPE may possibly take many, you know, many descriptions with respect to how are we protecting everyone in our community, both through physical modifications and safety supports, but as well as emotionally and relationally too.
Mm-hmm. Great.
There was a question. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
There was a question here about what are people seeing with regards to vulnerable populations and the impact it's having?
I'll just say something really briefly, and that is what we've heard from our service providers is some of our individuals who are experiencing homelessness are showing more resilience than some of our service providers because they have continued to adapt to changing conditions. But also with services being closed and or modified, some of our populations are getting pushed farther and farther out into, we have both rural and urban environment here in Western Fraser Valley. So for example, we have an increased number of young women who are pregnant, who are being pushed out farther and away from service. So I am interested in hearing from the other panel too, like, you know, there's been a lot of opportunity to increase support, but then with it, there's still creating challenging conditions.
I can speak in terms of Grande Prairie. So we see the opioid crisis kind of skyrocket because the access to safer drugs, it's just not there. And so our SCS is doing really, really great work, and they are seeing that the drugs of choice right now are quite dangerous. And so there is onboarding with Alberta Health Services to send out an alert and let everybody know if there's a bad batch and all of that stuff too. What we're seeing in terms of, I'll be specific with our navigators and where we focus our ICA right now, is that individuals that may or may not be level 1 or 2 navigators, and so people that will access them for supports, they may slide and need actually level 3 navigator supports during COVID due to loss of job, due to their house being in a precarious situation. And so that's where we slide into utilizing the level 3s more heavily. We have been seeing that our prevention and diversion team with our Grande Prairie Prevention Center right now is incredibly busy. There's been a lot of referrals to them, securing income or working on different job allocations or rehousing appropriately to whatever their budget looks like at that time. So we're seeing a shift here, but in terms of our homeless population, we have seen that it's kind of stagnant right now. We have an overflow shelter. They're doing really great work in connecting with our level 3s and just support services all around. And so we are doing a cohesive approach, but we have been seeing individuals that may or may not have been lower acuity slide into higher acuity depending on what their situation was during the COVID response.
Thanks. Great questions from Betty. She asked, how do you ensure data is shared to follow the OCAP principles? Excellent question. So I can tell you about our stuff, but I think it's an easier question for us because we have this built into our work. But all the data that is collected in HelpSeeker on interactions is all anonymized data, so we don't know who does what. All we know is that there's interactions with the system, and that was the OCAP principles were part of that, so that we actually don't know about Indigenous or any ethnicity related stuff. It's all anonymized. The other piece that we've done kind of consciously is when we do systems mapping, anything that's on reserve or on Indigenous controlled areas, etc., we only map those with the permission of the First Nations governments and with their kind of literal blessing and okay. And anything that we do with Indigenous organizations, we don't, because we license the use of data, for instance, for research purposes, we don't charge any of that to an Indigenous community or an Indigenous organization. So that's part of our kind of saying, you know, we're operating on treaty land, and part of our work in reconciliation is to lend our data in kind to those communities where it might be useful as part of our commitment to that. So that's one. So if you are an Indigenous community that wants systems mapping and would benefit from something like this, then get in touch, because it's work that we do in kind. And we have great relationships in BC and Alberta with First Nations communities that might be good kind of models to build on with those of you that might be looking at this kind of work in your communities as well. But I don't know if anybody else wants to chat about OCAP in your respective shops. I know the cities have different processes to do this, and organizations like CMHA might have their own processes around data and OCAP as well. No other takers. All right, sorry.
We follow the same as you, Alina, in terms of making sure that we get the okay and the blessing, and ensuring that whatever data is being collected is understood and following all system precautions and stuff. So just making sure that you're following what you need to follow.
Cool. Okay, thanks. And then Francis says, midwives, ooh, good one. Are midwives being invited to participate in one or more of the pods and hubs? They'd probably fit 1, 2, and 3. Strong in Ontario and utilizes initial contacts. Oh, that's a great one. Good one. Maybe Lori and Shanda, if you want to take that one. Maybe we haven't thought of it, but maybe a good one.
I'll start and say, actually, no, that is probably right now some of the work we're doing is identifying who we've missed and what we've missed, and inviting them into the more long-term structure for the pods that we'd like to create. I feel like now that we can breathe a little bit, like it all worked and it was magnificent, but it was very quite informal and thrown together. So we are looking at the gaps that we're starting to identify, and that would definitely be one. However, I can tell you in Alberta, and especially in Lethbridge, I don't even know that we even have any licensed wives here right now. It's been quite a contentious issue in Alberta for a couple of decades about the lack of midwives we have. So, but midwives, doulas, I saw somebody else asked a question about like maternity care. That is not something that we have a specialized pod for, but probably should look at. We would probably have those people currently, any would be involved, would be in the parenting pod, but that's something I will make a note of.
Good one.
I think, sorry, Shanda, did you want to go ahead?
No, you go first. Yeah.
I was just going to say, because we are working in Hastings County, Ontario also, and because obviously midwives are more prominent there in their work. Again, it's just that localized context of, are midwives super integrated into it? Are they not? But definitely when we look at early intervention and prevention, those first few years of life, that's where we want to ensure midwives are integrated. They're the ones doing the home visits. They're the ones who are going to catch your postpartum depression symptoms that your partner can't see. So it's super, super relevant.
Yeah, good one.
Yeah, so I'll just reiterate kind of what Lori said too in terms of midwives and doulas. And in Alberta, it is contentious that there's not really a base for that. I know a lot of women that even I know would really like to access that service. But in terms of where they would sit in level 1, 2, 3, I think for kind of what we focus on with our FCSS funded contracts, our pregnant parenting teams, our parenting contracts that we have, we would be focusing on level 1s and 2s. And then if they identify level 3 for sure, then they would certainly, if they meet that skill set, we would think about it.
Right. Teachers are another big one. So I know Trev's listening in, he's an ex-teacher, but they're definitely on the hit list for level 1s and probably level 2s for some of their more resource teachers that are in schools. Librarians, yeah, there's lots of these natural navigators. We also have this aunt, her name is Cheryl, and she is always in everybody's business in a really good way. But like, we're thinking like, how do we get those informal, these aunties that are, everybody's got one in their networks, like how do we arm them with this information so that they, because that's where people naturally go. They don't even, maybe talk to the doula and the primary care physician. They'll talk to that aunt first, or that friend. So yeah, we're trying to figure out exactly who these natural supports are so that we can arm them with this information and to be really good level 1s as well. Okay.
Question here about the, is it possible to get a copy of the onboarding package or an overview of what the package entails? And are you able to share the assessment form, what it may look like? I think that question came in when Shanda was presenting. So maybe Shanda, you could speak to that one.
I don't see why not. I think sharing resources is probably the best approach that you can do. And then in terms of the assessment, is that the wellbeing screener? I'm wondering if they're talking about the housing assessment. Because if it's a housing assessment, we use the SPIDAT that can be found on ORCode. So the varying levels of SPIDAT, and then the wellbeing screener is in development.
Yeah, we can, and that's something that Lethbridge and GP are working on together. Like they're testing, and we're doing some interviews this week again to make the screener a really nice experience. We're doing interviews with these target groups, the auntie, the teachers, the nurses, to make sure that this is something usable and flows and meets their needs. Because obviously right now we have, like, it's paper, but we want it to be an app experience and then have it integrated with those resources in HelpSeeker, so that as you fill out that assessment, all those resources pop up that are the best match for you according to your screener. So yeah, I think our goal is to have it out in the next 3 months. Right now it's the user interface and user experience, it's called UX, is what the team has been working on. So as we speak, actually. Okay, do we have everything? I think we got it all. And Jenny, any other last points or questions before we let everybody go?
Yeah, I mean, there was, can you comment, well, we kind of touched on this already, but can you comment on postpartum integrated care access in your communities. There was also another question about peripheral service participation in the coordinated access meetings. So we talked about that a little bit earlier about the importance of having those more incorporated. Yeah, that was, and then if you wanted to chat, there was a question, Alina, that somebody had asked, and I know that you'd already kind of addressed it, but there was a question about how is HelpSeeker funded? Which
so it's a SaaS, it's not to be sassy, it's software as a service, which it's a type of, so the software itself is free, the front-facing stuff is free, that's our social enterprise part, and then we commercialize this kind of freemium model. So if you want more dashboards and more analytics and things like that, then you get a license fee to get access to that back-end data. So usually it's municipalities or coalitions that want all the stuff that Lori was showing you guys about, I want to do heat maps, or I want to do cross-reference with Statistics Canada or Google Trends. So as it's people that care about that tend to purchase the license, and then with that license we do all this systems mapping work for the community so that it's up to date and stays up to date. So that's how that piece is funded. Systems change stuff though, or things like the well-being screener, we do because we might have another contract that says, hey, help us roll out integrated coordinated access. And the contract might be for a certain amount of money, and part of that money might be develop this well-being screener as part of that, or do a training package for us. And so that's how we do that piece. And then we try to leverage. So if we're doing something in Grande Prairie, adapted rather than kind of duplicated in another community. So that's how we can keep things a little bit leaner and affordable to communities as well. So that's the main sources. Okay. Anything else? Oh, sorry, Kyle, you were saying, is there somewhere I can find info about Indigenous data in written form? So anything that's OCAP itself, and I wasn't sure if you were talking about OCAP, but that they have a whole website, and they have different bodies across the country that kind of operate or help operationalize OCAP and research projects or departments and policy and things like that. So there's tons of that if you give that a Google. If you're interested in ours, HelpSeeker, just drop me an email. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to. And then the other bodies, those cities have their own policies and things like that. So I don't know, Shanda or Lori, where your guys' reconciliation policies and things like that and committees information, I'm guessing is going to be on your website as well.
There was a question, so this is perhaps more provincially based across coordinated systems, especially those crisis hubs. Are people starting to see fallout from vulnerable populations who accessed federal income programs with regard to their month-to-month social assistance? Aside from the clawbacks, are people getting threatened to be kicked off of those core benefits? Also for the systems folks, what are the post-pandemic strategies to handle these types of repercussions?
Good one. Good one. The short answer is yes, we're hearing lots of fallout and lots of anxiety about the CERB, the CREB, and then the clawback concerns provincially as well. But I don't know if you guys want to chime in on any further details that you're hearing on the ground.
I'll just add that our social service providers that have been sort of dealing with this have all commented that it depends on who they talk to when they call on behalf of their clients. They're getting mixed messages, so there is a lot of confusion out there. But I know our provincial government did update their website with some rules and things like that maybe a month or so ago. But the message on the website is not always the same as the message people are getting on the phone. So we're pretty concerned about it, but it sounds like the fallout will be like next year probably is when you know, people start to see it. We do not right now have a strategy in place, but it is something we've definitely red flagged as something that's going to be potentially a huge concern, especially to those people who are on our severely AISH, the Alberta Income for the Severely Handicapped. There's so much confusion there in what they're being told, and they're all being told differently.
Anyone else?
I can talk on behalf of Grande Prairie because this has been an ongoing discussion for the last 3 weeks for us, actually, specifically around individuals that are currently housed with our housing teams and Housing First. So we have a really good relationship with the Alberta Supports rep for Grande Prairie, and opened up those conversations quite early to see what the repercussions were going to be, kind of how we can plan ahead. And make sure that when bottom line hits is that it's not going to be a complete crisis all over again. And so one of the things that she did urge is for all of our housing workers to connect with their clients and do honest monthly budgets and see if they were claiming CERB and if they were also claiming Alberta supports, and making sure that they are reporting whatever income they have coming in, because in the end game, it will be easier to plan ahead with Alberta supports, so to ensure that they're not cut off completely, or if they are cut off, then we'll have a really good idea of how long and how we can use our supporting infrastructure in those months if they're cut off, so that they can ensure that they have housing stability. So kind of consolidating what we have in terms of financial resources, crisis resources, and making sure that we have a really good understanding of how many individuals claim CERB when they shouldn't have, and what the repercussions will be from that, and building individualized plans for each and every one of them in collaboration with Alberta Supports. So that's kind of what we're doing right now.
Yeah. So again, having Alberta Supports as part of your integrated coordinated access model, that will ensure that your ICA navigators have the most recent information. They're playing or from the same playbook, if you will. And then income supports workers are also acting as navigators, so that we're leveraging all the resources. Income supports caseworkers often have to make referrals to community supports as well. So oftentimes we think of them as the enemy sometimes, right? Because we're like always fighting to get more money for clients, but there's ways that you can bring them into the fold as another resource, and try to fill the gaps, because the community does have tons of resources with transportation, again, volunteers, etc. Like everybody's going to be broke after this. All governments are going to be looking to cut. So it's going to be really critical to get these systems tight and leveraging as much as we can, so people don't fall through the gaps. If these cuts start happening in one area, we can respond effectively and keep everybody in the loop. So on that note, I'm going to let everyone go, because we've gone a little bit over our time, but there was great questions, and we always try to keep going as long as we can to get as many of these out back to you. So Jenny, like I said, we'll follow up with the video and the deck as well, and we'll be following up with you for the next webinar coming up in July on technology innovation during the COVID social response. So with that, I want to thank everybody for participating on this call and sharing your insights with us. That was fantastic to see your progress, and we look forward to having you back and telling us more about your innovative approaches. So thank you so much.